make sure that you tune live. So you know I'm not AI. If you don't want to die, if you don't want to die, make sure you've got calories in your garden. Hey everybody, how you doing? It is another freezing evening, and I have on my fancy jacket to keep me from freezing. One little heater in my office out here. And you'd think, being so close to the tropics that here in lower Alabama and in the Florida Panhandle it wouldn't be so cold, but we've got this stabbing Arctic thing coming through right now. And over the last week before the freezes came in, I thought, let's do a little bit more work in the garden and pull some more calories out of the grocery rows. So that's what I was doing, and I was thinking, I haven't talked about this recently. It's probably been at least a few weeks. But if you want to have a garden that keeps you fed, you should think about what fills you up. This is something that gets overlooked a lot, I think. So I keep coming back to it. If you want your garden to feed you, you should grow things that make you feel full. Just seems kind of like a simple thing to me, but often you see these, here's how to plant a survival garden, etc. type of setups, and it's like, okay, if I'm going to survive, if I don't want to be hungry, why am I growing salad radishes and lettuce and kale? Why am I growing these things? I should be growing potatoes. I should be growing sweet potatoes. I should be storing calories in my garden, not rabbit food. If you fry potatoes, you feel pretty full. Even if you bake potatoes, you'll feel pretty full. But if you eat a head of lettuce, you're still going to be hungry afterwards. So if you're going to focus on what keeps you through a crisis, through a difficult time, or even what helps take off some of the stress from your budget by replacing meals that you would be buying otherwise, you've got to think about the sort of food that will keep you full. And so my main survival gardening advice is usually just grow calories. Calories first. Calories above all. I remember some years ago I wrote an article where I talked about how good a survival crop cassava was. Cassava is a very dense caloric staple. Has about twice the calories of an equivalent amount of potatoes. It is a perennial. It can be harvested at any time during the year. Once it reaches the proper size, it can be replanted at any time of the year. This is assuming a tropical climate. We have to do it a little bit different up here where we get freezes to take advantage of the warm season that we have. We can't just plant it in the fall and hope it's going to live. It doesn't work that way here. We've got to get it in as early as possible in the spring and then roll from there. But I remember writing this article and somebody took offense at it and wrote the site that I had recommended it on and said, this is terrible food. It's not very high in nutrients. It's almost all calories. It's almost pure carbohydrates. This is true. But it keeps you full. I'm not saying that you're going to just live on just cassava. I don't think that's a good idea. It leads to nutrient deficiency. We know this from Africa, where when cassava is just the staple that people live on all the time, they don't do very well long term. There's micronutrients that are missing. And it is important to have nutrient dense food, but you also need to be full. Some years ago, around the same time, we had this amazing bed of mixed greens that we would grow year after year. We had a bed that was just cinder blocks, and we had built the soil up in it and put compost in it. And it was near our back door when we were living in Central Florida. And we would put some spinaches and some various lettuces and some mustards and other things, and we would just mix up various salad greens together and sprinkle the seeds all over the surface and rake them in and water it in the end of the summer, beginning of the fall, and then all the way through the winter. We would cover it when it started to get cold, and we had great salad greens all the way through that season and into the spring until they all started to go to seed, and then it got too hot and they weren't very happy. A lot of those salad greens don't do all that great in Florida heat, so you have this period of time that's really good. However, I was out in the spring, and I was looking at this bed, and I said, man, it's really nice to have all these greens. But then as I was going around the yard, I was noticing all of the wild greens that were coming up. And I had been to a foraging class with Green Dean. I'm a big fan of Green Dean. If you don't own his book, Eat the Weeds, I highly recommend you get a copy of it, particularly if you're in the Southeast. Eat the Weeds, Wild Plant Foraging, very good book by Green Dean. But anyhow, I had seen all the different things that he ate, and we had started to incorporate more wild foods into our diet. And in the spring, there were smilax shoots everywhere, wild smilax shoots. And they taste rather like an asparagus when you cook them. And they're really good. Very easy to find. They're all over the place. They're actually a weed that people can't stand because they get really thorny later in the year, and they tear your legs up when you're going hiking through the woods, or you're trying to work in your garden and they're strangling stuff. If you clear a piece of woods, they tend to pop up again and become a big problem. But the shoots were really good, so I was always happy to harvest them from the woods around our property. And we only had 1 acre, but we lived in an area that wasn't completely developed, and we could just walk along the sides of the road, and these empty lots always had smilax shoots growing up around the oaks and the bays. And we could just go out there and break them off and eat them, and they would grow back. It was fantastic. Very nice wild foods to eat, and probably very good for you. Certainly more nutrient dense than cassava, even though they didn't really fill you up. We also went foraging for wild blueberries. We also went foraging for wild mushrooms, including chanterelles, bolete mushrooms, puffballs, and other mushrooms that were easy to identify and weren't going to kill us horribly. Mushrooms are one of those things you really have to know how to forage for, and I'm not going to give any advice to anybody on it anymore because somebody's going to end up dead and be like, oh, I thought you said I could eat that. No, I'm not going to answer for that in the next life, you know. But there were also thistles. There were also wild mustards. There was Biden's Alba all the way through the summer, which is a very nutritious wild green. And I remember coming back after wandering around the yard and looking at all these wild greens, chickweed, other things. And I said to my wife, why am I growing a bed of greens? They're sweet and tender and tasty, but I bet you they have only a fraction of the nutrient density of the wild greens that we can forage. And we didn't have to plant any of those. So just thinking about it, you're not actually going to have that much trouble unless you're really in a very dire situation and you only have a big patch of cassava to eat. Well, you know, you'll feel full, but then over time you start to feel like, oh, I don't feel all that hot, my teeth are getting loose, etc. because you didn't get enough nutrients. Well, that's usually not going to be a situation for most of us. There's usually something that you can forage, or you can grow a little patch of, or even better, you can get yourself some animal foods. Like if you're eating eggs and you're getting those wonderful, rich egg yolks, they're like a multivitamin. They've got the fats you need, they've got vitamins you need, they've got minerals you need. And so if you were to scramble some eggs and put some wild greens in them, you'll have plenty of nutrients. But the cassava will keep you full. So it's something to think about, what will keep you full. If you're not full because your whole garden is full of lettuces and maybe you've got some peppers, maybe you've got some basil. You've got all these things are all wonderful. But you go out there and you stuff all those things in your mouth and you try to go and get to work and get some things done, you're not going to be very full. But Rachel made cassava from some of our cassava. She roasted it. She puts a little bit of lard, which we got from our pigs, on the cassava pieces, and she roasts them in the oven. She boils them first until they're fork tender, and then she pats them dry, puts a little lard on them, and roasts them in a pan in the oven until they become crispy like cassava fries. A little bit of salt. Man, so good. And then she serves them with homemade mayonnaise, which is made with eggs, and I think she's got a little bit of lemon juice in there, and olive oil, so we don't eat all of that soybean oil, because we're not eating that stuff. We're not eating soybean oil. So, even just some roasted cassava or boiled cassava will keep you full. And you add some herbs to it, you add a few eggs to it, etc., you're going to have the nutrients to balance it out. But an empty stomach is an empty stomach. You're just not going to feel that great if you can't feel like you're full. So traditionally, if you didn't have enough animal foods, you would often eat roots and grains to feel full. So, like the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread. Or if I want to get fancy, panem nostrum quotidianum da nobis hodie. Give us this day our daily bread. You can eat a loaf of bread from your grains that you grew or purchased, and you feel more full. And you could have a mess of greens on the side, and you can get to work and get both your nutrients, and you can get your stick to the ribs calories. So for people further in the south, often those small grains are not particularly that efficient. The further south you get, it makes more sense to eat roots. And the further north you get, the more sense it is to eat grains. And then the farthest north you get, as I was saying yesterday, it makes more sense to eat animal foods, like the Inuit, eating a lot of fat and a lot of meat, a lot of fish and various mammals. Because there's just not a long enough season to grow what you need. So the long seasons down in the tropics create an abundance of plant food, particularly starches and carbohydrates and lots of sugars. So a mango tree could drop 500 pounds of mangoes. You can eat jackfruit when they're immature, and you can get something that's very much like a breadfruit. Or you can just eat breadfruit and bread nuts. You can eat plantains. You can eat green bananas that are cooked. My wife used to make a green banana pudding for breakfast that was really good. It was kind of like a porridge made from green bananas, boiled green bananas with a little bit of sugar and vanilla and cinnamon and nutmeg. It was something she picked up from the Grenadians. One of the Grenadians showed her how to cook it, and it became very popular with us. She used to make a kind of a bread out of breadfruit, a bread pudding that was really delicious. We had coconuts that you could open up and you could eat it, and it was like you just had so many things that you could eat that there was not, you were not gonna, just not gonna be hungry. But a lot of those things could come from plants that took a longer season. Like it might take 18 months for your plantain tree to turn around and make another batch of plantains for you. You get a little clump of plantain, like a little stand of plantains where you got 3 or 4 different trunks, and then you'll get some maybe in March, and then you might get another batch in October or something like that. And then there's no freezes, so those things don't get knocked out and knocked down, and you can have roots that take 14 months to produce, like some varieties of cassava. Great big cassava roots, but it took 14 months. If you're in a season where you only get 3 or 4 months of frost-free weather, you can't grow those big roots. And those roots, those carbohydrates, they take a lot of solar energy to produce, because if you think about it, the leaves of the plant are grabbing the sunlight and they are converting carbon dioxide and sunlight to sugars, starches, etc. And it takes a lot of solar energy to build up that great big amount of carbs beneath the ground that are being stored in those roots. So if you have a short season, you don't have enough time for that. So you get more limited to things that grow faster, like and that have some cold tolerance, like wheat or barley or rye, and small grains that take a higher amount of labor. I mean, because it does take a lot of labor to harvest them, dry them, husk them out, grind them, add yeast, bake it into bread. There's a lot of layers that goes into doing that. It's not like you can just dig it out of the ground and boil it. So we've experimented with small grains and have enjoyed trying to grow them and to make a little bit of bread out of them, but where we are in zone 8B, it just makes a lot of sense to grow roots. And it makes a lot of sense to grow roots anywhere that you can grow potatoes, because potatoes make such a great yield for a small space, and they are filling, and they can keep in the ground for a bit, and then they can keep in your root cellar, or they can keep in your pantry. They are a really good storable calorie source that keeps you full. But if you're growing something that's little and fiddly, like say you're going to grow arugula, well, it's easy to grow, but it doesn't really fill you up that much. I probably have 5 or 10 different varieties of wild greens that are growing around my property that I can just dig up and make a mess of greens out of. I can just chop them back. I do this regularly. In the summer, we might get some plantain and purslane and Biden's alba and things like that. And then in the winter, and particularly into the early spring, we can get the wild mustards, the wild onions, chickweed, and henbit, and other things like that. And we can just make messes of greens and cook them. So it's kind of a weird thing to think about. What if you're going to go hungry? But it's good to think about, because there are weird times that have happened all through history where people have been forced to rely on what they can grow or forage or hunt locally, and to keep that in mind. And also to think, just from an economic perspective and from a health perspective, how many of your meals can you replace from the garden? If you're just going to eat salads, let's say you have only a small space and you like to buy salad, just go ahead and grow the salads. That's great. But if you have the opportunity to, wouldn't it be great to have entire meals from your property that fill you up? So, wow, you have a little pear tree in the yard. You can have a few pears. You could try some pears, have them as a little side, kind of a nice thing, and you can go get some greens. Those are good. You're not really full with those things yet. But then if you had a nice baked potato, or even better, maybe you're raising some sort of meat or eggs on your property, or a little fancier, you've got milk, so you can have cream and butter and yogurt and cheese. Now you're living pretty well. So back in 2023, when our dairy was really in full swing, before we had our latest little good addition to the family, before the baby arrived, we were really getting into making our cheese and our yogurt and our butter and sour cream. And we had entire meals regularly where we had eggs from the chickens, we had cheese from the cows, we had cream in our coffee, and we had all kinds of greens, and we had roots from the gardens. We always had roots from the gardens of some sort. Like right now, we've got lots of yams. I've still got yams in the garden that I haven't dug. I can dig them all the way through the winter until about April, and then they start to deteriorate and they regrow. And then they're not good to eat really until November or so of the year. So you've got this period of time where they're kind of deteriorating and then regrowing in their active growth phase. But I can right now eat meal after meal after meal without buying any food. And then when you add the addition of the amount of pork that we got this last year from pigs, we raised 5 pigs. So we got 1,200 pounds of pork, and some of it was cured into bacon, some of it was cured into hams, and then we have some ground pork that we had ground by the butcher because they had those big industrial grinders that just go ahead and grind all that scrap meat, just grind it up. We'll pull that out and thaw it, and I will make breakfast sausage out of it with a whole bunch of seasonings and a little bit of maple syrup in it, and some of our own dried pepper flakes, and just throw that in there and make like spicy sweet breakfast sausage that tastes incredible, and we can eat that for breakfast and be full. And it's really good when we have a good carbohydrate like sweet potatoes or some roasted pumpkin or regular potatoes or true yams, or we did arrowroot the other day. That was kind of fun. We don't really have that many arrowroot, but it was kind of fun to try. And then we've got this beautiful, well-rounded meal. And of course, the closer you are into the city and the harder it is to keep animals, the smaller the space you have. I understand all those things. We've lived in small spaces before. We've not had space for animals. Our first little house had about a half an acre yard, but it had a big old drainage ditch through the middle of it, and it washed our gardens away repeatedly. It was terrible. My very first house that I bought was a little itty bitty house in Hollywood, Florida that had about a 10th acre yard. I mean, I can't keep a cow there. I couldn't have sheep, I couldn't have a flock of chickens. And a lot of people are dealing with that, and that's fine. So first of all, I would say grow calories that fill you up, and then grow some beautiful things that you love to eat that bring you joy. And things that will maybe save you money. So let's say you're buying fresh herbs. Grow a little herb garden, and then don't spend that money. Save it for something else that you love, or to give away, to help somebody else. So if you got something that you think you really like, don't worry about like, oh, it doesn't have that many calories. I mean, if you grow your calories first, and then you just add in a few things on the side that bring you joy. I mean, we don't have to be brutal utilitarians about everything. I like to make my own hot pepper sauce. Really like to make my own hot pepper sauce. I've got it down to what I think is the best tasting hot pepper sauce that I have ever had. I would rather eat the pepper sauce that I make than any purchased pepper sauce that I've ever had. And so I'll grow hot peppers. Could I live on hot peppers? No. I don't want to live on hot peppers. It would be a terrible experience to try and live on hot peppers. But it is really nice to have your own hot pepper sauce that you can put on scrambled eggs, that you can splash onto anything that you've got that you want to spice up a little bit. Make your own chili and you put your own hot pepper sauce in it. That's great. So one of the things I do just for joy's sake is I like to grow peppers. So this year I'm going to be growing a few varieties of sweet peppers because one of my daughters said she would really, really love more sweet peppers. So I said, all right, so we'll get a few varieties of sweet peppers and we'll put in some sweet peppers. And then in another part of the garden, we're going to put in a lot of hot peppers. And then I can have my hot sauce and my kids can enjoy the sweet peppers, which are just really nice to slice up and eat right from the garden. Just wonderful. They don't need any dip or anything. They're so sweet and good right from the garden. And that is just like the part that brings you joy around the edges. And you do get extra nutrition there. And you may even get extra medicine there, Cayenne is good for you, for example. But I know that right now, if the grocery store's shut, we could eat for months until the season turns around again and I can plant more. We could eat for months. Months. A lot of our meals are coming from the garden, like our roasted cassava last night. We had roasted cassava and pork chops. Both of them came from our yard. And my wife is going to be making some limoncello, which is a liqueur made from lemons, because I have a friend who just gave me an entire 5-gallon bucket full of lemons. My lemon tree is not that big yet. I only get the occasional lemon. But this lemon tree was absolutely loaded, and he said there were so many 5-gallon buckets he could have picked, but he just couldn't get to it. But here's 5 gallons of lemons, so we'll make our own limoncello. Now, I don't have a still, in case you're watching. In case you're watching Feds, I don't have a still, so I can't make my own alcohol, so I will buy it and pay the taxes on it to make the limoncello. But hypothetically, if everything collapsed and the government said it was totally fine for me to make my own alcohol, I could even produce that myself. So to have those calories first is kind of that, it's kind of like having a savings account where you don't worry about things quite so much. I mean, I remember when we were just totally down to the wire on trying to pay the bills and just broke. You know, you're totally broke and the savings account has been eaten down, and then you get a flat tire. And you take the car in and they say, oh, that tire on the other side is bald too. You need to do both of them. Well, what's that going to cost? Well, we don't have any used ones that'll fit your rims. That's going to be, $250. Man. But if you had a savings account that had $5,000 in it, you'd be like, okay, I don't have very good income this month, but I got $5,000 in the bank. I can just flex it. I mean, I need tires. It's no big deal. I got $5,000 in the bank. That's what Dave Ramsey talks about, Total Money Makeover. He's like, the first thing you're going to do is save a little emergency money account. You're going to save $1,000 that you don't touch. You pretend like $1,000 is $0. Then next time you have something break around the house, you don't have to whip out a credit card or borrow money to fix it. Hopefully, these things don't become such crises because you have some flexibility. You have this extra storage. And I feel that way about the garden. I feel like if you can go out and dig some roots out of the ground, or if you've got some good grains and beans that you've saved up if you're further north, if you have a root cellar that's full of good stuff, if you've got calories that can fill you up, and like, okay, this month is a bad month for us, we're just going to eat more potatoes, that's really a good feeling. It kind of gives you some flexibility. If there was some weird thing that happened, like a few years ago, there was a gasoline line that had a problem, some sort of shipping issue or something. I don't ever remember what it was, but there were lines to get gas. Well, if you have more at home for that sort of thing, it's not that big a deal. All right, I don't have to drive to the grocery store. I'm going to eat potatoes. Maybe I'll get a few eggs from the chickens, chop those potatoes up, stir fry them up, make some home fries, scramble some eggs in there, throw some herbs from the garden on it, and then some of my homemade hot sauce. Yeah, you guys still get a good breakfast, right? So to have those calories first, the ability to keep full, and even in particular, not to have to buy them all ahead, like you're buying, 5-gallon buckets full of beans and rice and stored foods and MREs and that sort of thing. All of that is not bad. It's nice to have all kinds of savings accounts. There's all kinds of ways you could save money. I mean, some people, because they know the dollar is deteriorating, some people buy good old tools and they keep them. Or they might buy an old tractor and keep it because they know that that's going to hold its value. Some people buy collectibles. Some people buy guns. Some people buy gold and silver. Some people buy extra food. Some people buy all of the above. Some people try to figure out how to stockpile in ways that isn't subject to inflation, or maybe will float above inflation. And I think one of the ways that you can really flex with this is to add flexibility to your garden by making sure that you've got that Dave Ramsey savings account in your garden of food that can get you through a weird time. And it just is a little extra peace of mind. And if you're going to be gardening anyways, why not pack in some stuff that'll keep you full? I remember somebody once said, why in the world would you grow potatoes when potatoes are so cheap from the store? It's like, because I don't outsource everything to the store. Right? Like, you could go completely minimalist. I read a book on minimalism a year and a half ago. And the author said that the city was his warehouse. That he kept almost nothing of his own at all. Almost no anything in his house, because if he ever needed anything, he could always go to the such and such store and buy this. He could go to the deli and he could buy this. If he really needed something, a new pair of socks, he could go to the department store and get some socks or whatever. Like, the city was his warehouse. The city was his storage. So instead of stockpiling everything at his house, where he's just got piles of stuff he's got to take care of and look after and store, he could live extremely simply with almost no worries whatsoever and just count on the city to be his warehouse. And there's a certain piece to that. I mean, the birds of the field, they neither toil nor sow, and they do not store up in barns, yet the Lord feeds them. There's a lot of wisdom in that kind of an idea, but on the other hand, you're also trusting that this complicated system that we have now is going to endure. You know, when the supply lines to the grocery stores got really weird in 2020 and everybody was stockpiling toilet paper and things like that, and you had entire shelves. I remember going into a Walmart and just seeing an entire shelf that was nothing but folding chairs, because there was nothing else to go there. So they had just taken a whole bunch of folding chairs and put them in a long row for sale. But all of that area was supposed to be packed with other goods, but there were all these weird supply chain disruptions, and it was sort of a glimpse of what it could be like if things got weird. So the scriptures also say that a wise man lays up an inheritance for his children, and the prudent sees danger and flees. And a man that is a good, hardworking man who is thoughtful about the future doesn't necessarily just trust that everything's going to be taken care of for him. He fixes his fences, he takes care of his animals, he plants grapes, he harvests his grapes in his season, you know. He manures the fig tree and digs around it to make sure that it's going to produce, and if it doesn't produce, he puts something else there. You know, so there's a balance where you don't want to worry a ton, but there's also prudence where you just make sure that you've got something that's going to keep you full. And having a lot of roots in the ground, like right now, if I go out, you know, once we run out of the stuff we've already dug, because there's so much stuff we already dug, it's kind of ridiculous. I've got yams that are probably going to spoil on the porch before we eat them, because I got a little bit exuberant about digging them up. I got a little excited about how many there were, and I may have dug maybe 100 pounds too many. But if we go through and know that I've got this amount of food out here on the porch, and then I got another few hundred pounds I could go and dig if I had to out of the garden. When we have our low spot in finances during the year, which always happens through the winter, people are not that interested in gardening channels. People are not that interested in buying gardening books. There's not much. I can't sell anything out of the nursery right now because the freezes. I mean, if I shipped cassava cuttings right now, I mean, I don't do it. My daughter does it. But if she was to ship them, and I said, I've got a whole round of cassava cuttings you can take and ship, they could freeze in the mail, and just people would just end up with dead plants. So this time of year is just pretty dead for us. But we can eat on what we grew previously in the year, and we can continue to eat out of the garden. So we had ham and eggs for breakfast. It was our ham. It wasn't our eggs right now because of some crafty predator, but we're going to fix that. We have lots of turnips and daikons that we can still pull in. We've been having turnip greens regularly and chopped up turnips. We got a really nice sweet turnip. It's called White Lady turnip. It's a variety that just has a excellent flavor. Really, it's so good that you just want to eat the turnip raw. And I never found that to be the case with purple top turnips. They're always kind of bitter and like, ugh, I don't know. But these white turnips, I've chopped them up and eat slices of them. They're so good. And then we've got daikon radishes. I brought in 5 pounds of daikons yesterday, just enough to make a couple of jars of fermented daikon pickles. And then the couple that we didn't eat right away, they went into the fridge, and they'll be sauteed probably with some eggs or something over the next couple of days. But they do keep for quite a while when you pull them. And I thought, I'm just going to pull a few. I ended up pulling more than I needed to make pickled daikons. We dug galangal ginger the other day, and I looked up how to make Japanese sushi ginger. And I sliced them up, and I added in some sugar, and you saute them. You don't really saute them. You just sort of boil them in water a little bit till they get a little bit soft, and then you've got some salt and some sugar and some vinegar, and you put them in jars, pack them in jars, the slices of ginger, and then the next day, the flavors are supposed to mesh, and it tastes really good, and it was supposed to be perfect and whatever, and I tasted them, and it was completely according to plan. It was exactly as advertised. Super delicious, sweet, sour, zippy ginger slices, which are really good for your stomach. It's good when kids get sick in the winter, and they're really pleasant to just add as a side. So I did 1 jar just to test and see if I had proof of concept. And man, it was so good. They're so good. I'm going to make a ton more. It makes me want to plant so much ginger. But having those little bits and pieces in the ground all the time where you can always dig it, it gives you that flexibility. It's like when your tires go out. Oh, I'm having a bad week. I don't have the money to pay for my tires. Well, if you had the money in the bank, you would. If you have the food in the ground, you don't have to go buy food. You don't have to keep buying food. Food inflation? I don't like food inflation. It's terrible. But I can take a lot of the edge off by having food that fills me up in the ground. So first of all, if you have a smaller space, if you're in the city, if you are backyard gardening scale, and you can grow food that fills you up, plant that first. Secondarily, if you have more space, get some of those animal foods in there so you can have your fats and your proteins. And I mean, if you can get milk, it's fantastic. It's high effort to get milk though. But if you can just get eggs and the occasional chicken, makes a huge difference. And then you can forage for greens. You can grow little patches of greens. You can grow some herbs around the edge. You don't have to say, I'm never going to grow any of these things. All I'm going to do is grow potatoes. I remember a Mystery Science Theater 3000 episode where there was this guy, I think it was called Death Stalker. This guy ends up staying with some peasants, and he's like, what is there to eat? Don't you have any meat? And they just had this big pile of potatoes, and the woman's like, potatoes are what we eat. Potatoes are what we eat. And they're just gnawing on potatoes. No, you don't have to be like that. But if you're full, it makes everything else easier. I would really rather have some cassava to get me through, or some potatoes, or some sweet potatoes, or something to make me feel full so I can keep working. You can work a long time on a belly full of cassava or potatoes, and you can get stuff done. So I'm gonna take here. That's just what I wanted to say today, and I will answer questions. I also, if anybody is interested, I want to invite you to check out our school.com/thesurvivalgardener. This is our community where we're doing challenges and sharing gardening ideas. We have over 200 people in the community, and it has been really useful. It's better interaction than you can get on YouTube, and you can check it out. You can try it for free. You can sign up for a week for free. But I have my food forest course and everything else in there. It is well worth it. You will literally have the ability to save thousands of dollars a year on food with just the information that's in there. So definitely check that out if you're interested. So here we go. All right, Chooch, you are also banned. We're not gonna have any weird crudity in here. Rusty, I know you're responding. I'm just gonna remove that, but not gonna be yucky here, okay? Let's see what we got here. I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna look through what everybody said here. YouTube Police says you need calories and nutrients as well. Yes, absolutely. And also taters are even better when you grow them yourself. Yeah, that's one of the things about potatoes. I never knew how good potatoes tasted until I grew them myself. When we harvested our own potatoes, they tasted so much better than store-bought potatoes. I said, I'm gonna always grow these. So good. Tapioca is made from cassava, that's right. We used to eat it all the time. It's so good. Super good. 2 streams in a row, definitely a bot. Yeah, I'm trying to get I'm trying to get back into doing these streams. I know a lot of people appreciate a longer format so you can listen at work tomorrow or something like that. So somebody said to me, you should do more podcasts. Podcasts are huge. So I said, all right, I'll just do more live streams. And right now there's not a lot to see in the garden, so you just have to look at my face and hear me talk. You can slice and fry cassava like a potato chip or make flour out of them. That's right. I boil them. We boil them first just to make sure that the cyanide precursors are out of them, and then we fry them. But you could probably cut them thin and fry them. It would be okay, but I do know that boiling them removes that. It off-gasses that. So we do that until it's fork tender, and then we cook it otherwise. Thank you, Grandma Zoo. I have the deed to the G library. He made me the food forester I am today, wearing his Compost Your Enemies hoodie right now. All right, that's awesome. Thank you. Matt says, there's a lot of old mushroom hunters and there's a lot of bold mushroom hunters, but there's not a lot of old, bold mushroom hunters. That's totally true. Carl says, dandelion greens, various nettles, and pine needles are all edible and drinkable also. Yeah, dandelion greens are fantastic for you. They tend to get bitter really quickly here, but I always try to mix a few in. Stinging nettles are definitely nutritious. I've had pine needle tea. Adding a lot of sugar is probably, yeah, it's probably not good. Yes, cassava leaves are edible if cooked, though I find that they have a very papery texture. I'm not a big fan of that. But they do have a lot more nutrients in them, and they have more protein in the leaves than they do in the roots. Quite a bit. So I know that shredded, fermented cassava greens are a thing. Let's see here. Yep, yams for massive calories. The thumbnail on this is the giant yam that we dug this fall. 85-pound yam at 2 years old. Sweet potato leaves in the heat. Yes, that's a good option. Sweet potato leaves are pretty regularly eaten in our house. It is funny, every time I harvest sweet potatoes, people are like, did you know that you can eat the greens? I'm like, yes, I know that you can eat the greens. Yes, I know that. Why aren't you eating all those greens? And we would be pulling these huge amounts of vines out, and people are like, you should be eating those greens. I'm like, there's no way I am eating all of these sweet potato greens. Those sweet potato vines are so long, and they're everywhere. We grow lots of sweet potatoes. I'm not eating all those greens. Those greens go to the cows or to the pigs. Rusty says, I'm going to try sorghum. Yeah, I'm going to try sorghum this year as well. I actually would like to grow some syrup sorghum. We're in the middle of fixing our cane mill right now, and we've pulled it all apart. We found out that one of the rollers in it has a cracked part on the interior of it, and the shaft is not holding onto the roller very tightly, so I have a feeling that it's going to give up and break. But I have a couple of friends that are very clever with mechanical things, and I've got a friend that's looking at it right now, so he says it's totally fixable. But if we can get the cane mill up and running in good time, I'd like to till up a big area and plant some cane sorghum so we can make sorghum syrup in the summer. And then later in the year, we can make cane syrup. But our sorghum, I think, will be the first thing we run through the mill, hopefully. Yeah, Biden's Alba is just a really good green, Sean. I appreciate it. Carl also says there's not good transitional seasons down here. It gets hot or cold very quickly and abruptly and randomly. I agree. It's too fast. It'll go from 70s and 80s down to the 20s. It is rough. Biden's Alba is also called shepherd's needles. Jake says, I noticed that the 2023 plant hardiness zone map isn't very accurate. I think a lot of areas are half a zone colder than it shows on the map. The 2012 map is more reliable in my opinion. Yes, absolutely. Totally agree with you. I like the older map much better. I think that the newer map, they kind of pushed it. They're like, everything's getting warmer. I'm like, yeah, right. You still get these brutal cold blasts through. And, even if it were a little bit warmer over the course of the winter, but we still got weather down to, 16 or 17 degrees. I'm sorry. Whatever zone you're saying we live in, we can't grow starfruit. So if you try to plant the stuff that says that it's for that zone and you get one winter like that, it's over. So it's much safer to take the colder version of the map because the cold is really what kills a lot of your more tropical stuff. Yes, 5-leaf yam is a good one. I have found that the bulbils on it are very good to eat. And so we'll probably just be harvesting them for bulbils in the future. Those are the little ones that grow on the vine. They're about the size of a ping pong ball, and it makes a lot of them. If we don't harvest the big root beneath the ground, it'll just keep growing back and making more and more baskets of those aerial bulbil roots that, when are boiled until fork tender, are delicious. Meat rabbits, roots, and wild greens covers the vast majority of hunger and nutritional needs. Yes. Rusty says, I like gourds. Growing Kakuza this coming year makes a great bread. Yeah, Kakuza was one of our more awesome finds of the last 4 years. When we first moved back to the United States, my friend Elizabeth said, you've got to try Kakuza. It grows so vigorously, and it'll make you so many, and it tastes better than the other summer squashes. And so we grew some, and man, it was good. And then we got something like 160 pounds of it this year. So, yeah, there is no silver bullet. You want lots of sources of income into your bank account and kitchen rather than everything coming from the Mega Shop Corp. I agree. Grandma Mzu, pick it, eat it, says 95% fruit and veggies from my forest here. That's fantastic. Good work. Food is so expensive now that even just saving on a few meals will add up, Carl says. I absolutely agree. A gallon of gas costs less than a gallon of real fruit juice here in Florida. That's very wrong on very many levels. Yeah, a gallon of gas. I guess you could drink it instead of orange juice in the morning. It's cheaper. Save you a little bit. Grandma Mzu says, I help process pastured chickens in exchange for some chicken. That's a good trade. I have helped process pork and was given some pork as part of the help, so that's great. Rusty says, I did that with wild pig before. YouTube Police says, my wife has so many critters at our house, but she would never let us eat any of them. Yeah, this is a problem. This is not good. Okay, so I know somebody that got goats because they thought they would have some milk and they could have some meat. And so they started with 5 or 6 goats, and then the next year they had 10 or 12 goats, and now they're up to about 100 goats, and I don't think they have butchered any of them. They just have a field full of little dwarf goats, and they just continually breed. And they've tried to separate them and try to keep them from breeding, but goats are very good at figuring out how to breed and get bred. It's a huge amount of goats, but the ladies of the house do not want them eaten. They're all named. So it's kind of crazy. But That happens. Some people just can't stand the thought of it. But you have to make sure that you're not raising liabilities, you're raising assets as much as possible. Sean says, sometimes you must put flowers in your food. Wait a minute. Sometimes you must put flowers in your food, Forrest, not because they're good or particularly nutritious. Sometimes you must put flowers in your food, not because they are good or particularly nutritious, but simply because they are pretty. The true, the good, and yes, the beautiful are all worth pursuing. They also make wonderful companion plants for the maters, Sean. Make them. Do I want to share that hot pepper sauce recipe? Yes, it's actually in Rachel's book, the Fluid Forest Cookbook. So you have to buy the book to get it. Help my wife and all of her little starving children. Just a second, I'll put a link. If you're interested, if you want to support my wife. Otherwise, you can just go to my blog and find it. But let's just pretend it's only in the book. Freshness and lack of preservatives alone make it worth the effort. Lack of bad and poison is a win in this day and age, sadly. I absolutely agree. You know, I've had this debate back and forth between, do you grow 100% organic or do you grow with some chemical fertilizers? I'm like, well, Epsom salt is a chemical fertilizer, isn't it? And then you could say, well, with magnesium sulfate, why wouldn't I have a little potassium sulfate? So you throw a little potassium sulfate out there. And next thing you know, you're throwing phosphorus out there and elemental sulfur or whatever else. I don't actually have a problem with using elements to fertilize the garden, chemical fertilizers. That doesn't really bother me. What does bother me is poisons. I don't think magnesium sulfate is a poison. I don't think borax is really a poison. I mean, if you eat much of it, it would be. But a pinch of borax to put the boron in the soil, I think is a great idea. So I'm not that worried about adding nutrients to the soil via elemental chemicals, you know. But I don't want to spray malathion. I don't want to put 7 dust on stuff. I will let the bugs eat stuff sometimes just because I'm not going to do that. It's like I'm just going to have to share it with the bugs because I just cannot imagine misting my garden with various poisons to kill the bugs, harvesting those tomatoes, green beans, lettuces, etc., and giving them to my beautiful little 3-year-old daughter and saying, "Here, Daddy grew this." It just is repulsive to me to think of spraying poisons on purpose when we're trying to get poisons out of our lives and out of our kitchen. We're trying not to eat genetically modified. We're trying not to eat any seed oils or hydrogenated oils. All these things, and then you're gonna try and grow your own food, and you have this opportunity to grow food that is free of almost all those poisons, except what might be in the rain or the atmosphere, and then you deliberately go out and blast the bugs on it. It's like, you know what? The bugs can eat it if it's really going to be that bad. But generally, when we intercrop things, a lot of different things together, we always have plenty of decent food without spraying anything. We're just not going to do it. Low Country Gardener says, I grow Scotch bonnet pepper just for making jerk sauce and jerk seasonings because I'm a jerk chickenaholic. Oh yeah, I can understand that. Yes. A single citrus tree can make thousands of dollars of fresh organic fruit with ease. Lots of them are going bonkers right now. Yep. Fermented veggies, kombucha, money-saving healthy greatness, absolutely. I have grown some super hot peppers too, YouTube police, and I just don't find them that enjoyable. I like enough spice to be delicious and to push you a little bit, make you sweat a little bit, but I just don't see any, I don't have any joy in growing scorpion peppers, for example. Yeah, money takes away the anxiety and the dread. Problems become inconveniences. I know what you mean. That's why I work 64 hours most weeks for security. 7 years of feast, 7 years of famine. Bad things will happen. Be prepared. Yes. YouTube Police also makes a really good point here. To develop the skill of gardening is something you can fall back on when unseen circumstances arise. That's right. So you're also building a skill, and it's a skill that can help others and feed others, that might get other people through difficult times. So if you know how to grow potatoes now, you may not have to grow potatoes now, but you have the skill for the future, and you know that that skill is with you and you can do it. And if you teach your family as well, if something happens to you, they can do it. If you teach your neighbor, he knows how to as well. You probably saw that video of my friend Kate, who grew the gigantic yam in her yard. I gave her a yam that was about this big and said, here, plant this thing. And she planted it and dug it, and they got a gigantic yam. She can barely pick the thing up. And they had never grown yams before. They had never seen yams before until they came to our garden, and they looked like, what is that? I said, all right, you're going to have to grow this. Homegrown is more nutritious than store-bought and tastes better. Most things in the store were harvested early. Oh, yes, I agree. Fabric Dragon says, it's fine to keep luxuries in that city warehouse, but even if the warehouse is still okay, what if you got snowed in? What about fires, floods, pandemics? I agree. The YouTube homestead cool kids are great at buying 50 acres, but they never end up truly owning it. The difference is profound personally and economically. Yeah, I agree. You can do a lot of things with a bank, but you don't own what you have. The bank owns it. But then again, do you really own your property if you have to pay property taxes? I don't think you could really own it. It seems to me that the way things are set up now, no matter what you're doing, you're renting. You're either paying the bank for their property or you're paying the government for their property. You're really paying both of them when you have a mortgage and property taxes. If you don't pay your property taxes, the government can take your property. That means it's not yours, it's theirs. So it is good to have a paid off mortgage. Absolutely. It's a very good thing. But still, to actually own it is sort of impossible, so far as I understand it. I've heard of people doing things like getting alluvial titles and things like that, and they could just say that there's no such thing as property taxes or whatever, but I don't really believe it. I just think that this is the way the system is, this is the way we gotta live, and I don't really get into all of that. I also feel like because this world is not our home, because we should be looking to the greater country beyond this world, that to hang on to anything too tightly here is a mistake, because you can't keep it anyways. So, you know, there's like a period of time you can use and steward and take care of something, but you know that all of it is really ultimately fleeting, and the only thing you're going to take with you is your soul and the souls of anyone else that God may give you the grace to lead to his kingdom through the course of your life. But otherwise, you're naked when you arrive, and you're naked when you leave. So that's something to remember too. You know, there's a lot of wisdom in going by the graveyard every once in a while and just walking around. Figs. Oh, totally. Grow figs. Make fig preserves. Yummy. Lots of potassium. Oh yeah, that's good. Jake says relying on external sources is never a good idea in my opinion. Things may be fine now, but if something ever happened to those sources, then you're in trouble. I agree. I think it's good to not act like totally panicky all the time and feel like everything's going to collapse, etc. But on the other hand, to not have complete and utter faith that nothing will ever change and everything will go on as the way it was in the days of our fathers forever and ever. Amen. It's good to prepare for difficult times, but also to enjoy the time that you have. It's okay to go out to the coffee shop with your wife and enjoy a somewhat expensive coffee, and not to be there going, you know what, probably within a year or two, the way the commodities markets are going, we're not even going to be able to get coffee. And when World War III starts, we may never taste it again. So enjoy it, darling. Enjoy it while we have it, because we're going to be reusing the same tea bag 50 times, you know, within 2 years or so, and that's all we're going to get. We'll be happy for that. You know, that's not a good way to live either. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Figs are easy to propagate too, Grandma Zoo says. Stuck 14 in the ground this year. Now I wait. Good work. Everglades tomatoes probably won't do well in Alaska, so to speak. It's better to know what cultivar does well in your environment. I agree. Rusty says it's harder and harder to find knowledgeable locals. Yeah, and sometimes you may just have to be the knowledgeable local. You may have to do the work. And you may have to just read historic books, too. You can get a lot of information from historic texts. Let's see. I'm going along here. Generations of knowledge are being lost. Yes, I agree. Carl says, I just talk to random people every time I buy seeds in the store. No shame. What are you getting? Do you like them? I tried XYZ last year. Most plant nerds love to chat, I found. Oh yeah, I've made friends that way before. Green Country Agroforestry says we've been using daikon greens instead of lettuce. The salad bowl never empties. No, it won't. But man, some of our daikon leaves have been pretty sharp. I'm sure they're better for you than lettuce, but man, I've had some of them really kick your, whew, a lot of mustard burn there, you know. Fabric Dragon says, my husband is diabetic, so the high carbohydrate foods that are easy to grow and to store aren't always a good idea for him. So I had to concentrate on how to grow protein. Well, good for you. That's a good thing to do. And, you know, growing protein is great. I mean, I've considered in the past, like, what if I just let the gardens go and did a flock of free-range chickens like Florida Bullfrog, and we just ate chicken and eggs all the time. And I just let them breed and run all over the property, put some Muscovy ducks in the pond, and we just live basically carnivore except for some fruit, you know. But I really like growing everything, and I miss things, so... Rusty says, whenever I see a nice garden, I pull in and knock on the door to chat. Oh, I'm totally with you. I think it's a good idea. Leah says, hi, David. I have lab beans in abundance, but I'm not sure how to prepare them safely. Do you have any tips? Sending love from Australia. No, I have not done anything with them other than, I think we cooked them when they were green before. I don't know that we ever cooked them when they were all the way hard. You would have to talk to somebody from Asia, probably. I know that some varieties of them are really pretty high in anti-nutrients. My guess would be to soak them overnight for a day or two, and then to cook them well and maybe change the water, but not sure. Not sure. I actually avoid a lot of legumes, particularly dry legumes, because I don't like the phytates and the lectins, etc. And I never feel very well when I eat beans. I always feel like indigestive and makes my throat feel scratchy. Catmint Jelly says, our flock just started to lay. We're incredibly happy to have our eggs finally coming in. Good work. I'm catching up here. Property tax is preferable to arbitrary rent and landlords. Yes, definitely, I agree. The government is more dispassionate about it. Chris says, my forests are young but productive. I'm very thankful for your input. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'm glad it worked for you. Sunshine Country Garden says, my mangled beets got to 2 feet long. Ooh, that's awesome. I have tried growing bananas here. I have had the plants freeze to the ground 3 years in a row. Nothing is working right on the bananas. Terrible. But I do have some bananas in the greenhouse, and that's probably what I'm just going to have to do. Have a good evening, William. Green Country Agroforestry says Morocco is a cool place. Their markets have produce from all over the world, but the people are not dependent upon foreign trade to eat. They produce most of their own diet. I noticed that a lot of people in the Caribbean had their own gardens and they grew their own food. Even though they ate a lot of imported food, they could survive by fishing and growing food and foraging. I'm trying to move along here for questions. 210 megavolt says, question, how do I control mold or fungus growing on my fig tree leaves when in the humid greenhouse? I've not really had an issue with that before. I know that figs like more arid climates. So if it's really humid in there, they're probably just not going to be happy. It's going to be a repeating problem. But if you want a quick fix, usually you can take a little bit of yogurt, mix it with some purified water so it doesn't have chlorine in it, stir it up really good, and water the leaves with it or spray the leaves with it. And the various lactobacillus that are in the yogurt will usually knock out mold and fungus. If it's a black fungus, though, you may have to add a little bit of copper sulfate. Yeah, Carl says there are a lot of old-timers with garden channels here on YouTube. You just have to do some digging. The algorithm doesn't really promote them. Yes, I agree. There are some good people on here. I miss old Alabama Gardener. He was very good. Salve. Carl says some people do get inflammation from beans, and the Pythagoreans thought they were evil despite being vegetarians otherwise. Oh yeah, beans are evil. That's funny. Derek says, I was listening but was cutting up deer meat. That's a good use of time. Carl says, I've been piling up the mulch the last few days just in time for the cold snap. The banana trees are hanging on for now. Legio Maria says, are you in the Legion of Mary? That's cool. Says, D to the G, is it too late to start sweet potato shoots? No. I mean, shoot, it's early. I mean, I usually am not starting them until March or so. I plant them in the garden April and May. But you could start them in February if you had it warm enough. Green Country Agroforestry says, our dependence on globalism may bite Western civilization in the backside. We need more resilience for preserving civil society, even if we change political alliances. Yes, I don't think it was a good idea to ship all our manufacturing overseas and be ruled by multinational corporations. That's probably a bad idea. HBF Goats White says, I made your Seminole pumpkin bread today. Came out yummy. Oh, that's awesome. Good work. Salve. Yeah, I know. The V versus W. I'm sticking to the ecclesiastical Latin. Veritas. I remember when I learned classical Latin in high school, it was, it was like, Etiam capillus unus habet umbram suam. And it was veritas instead of veritas. Vestis virum redit. The clothes make the man, etc. But now we're learning ecclesiastical Latin, and they do use the V instead of the W sound. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen. So that's the Hail Mary in Latin, but it's ecclesiastical Latin. So it was kind of, they made some pronunciation changes and kind of solidified it. So I had to kind of remember the W, V, and then the T, instead of a hard T, it's like tsa, like grazia instead of gratia. But I would like to be able to read and directly read the classical Latin sources. There's a lot of Roman history I'm reading or have read in the past, and I think it would be much more satisfying to read it in the original Latin than it would be to read translations. To have to count on a translation, to me, is just kind of frustrating. But we do get a good bit of Latin at church, which is helpful. And then coming up, we're doing a little bit of a reading group with some friends, and we are going to be reading Suetonius's Lives of the 12 Caesars, but I chose the Robert Graves translation of it, which is pretty modern. We have a bunch of different people that are going to read it, so we'll read it bit by bit and discuss it. It'll be kind of fun. So, I wish though I was reading it in the original Latin, and I can make out enough of the Latin terms from my English and Spanish background to kind of get the gist of a Latin text sometimes, but the nuances are destroyed and I get lost. It's like, oh, I know that word, but what does that mean when it's joined to that? I don't know, I'm lost. So, it would be fun. So, will I read it live? That would be kind of fun. I could read everybody the lives of the 12 Caesars. Why is a gardening channel reading Suetonius? I don't know. It's from Julius Caesar to Domitian, and it's mostly complete. I think that they lost. I think the first portion of Julius Caesar's life was lost. That the original book was lost, but most of it is there. So, yeah, if anybody has any good suggestions on how to learn Latin, that would be good. So, yes, the Old Testament. The Old Testament is 100% Koine Greek. Yes, I'm not going to learn Greek too. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to learn ecclesiastical Latin, and I would like to be able to read the Vulgate in Latin. I have the Vulgate side by side with the English Dewey Reams translation, which is really cool. So I can check things in Latin against the English, but I tend to just read the English side almost all the time. So anyhow, have a great evening, everybody. I will be back again soon. I'm going to try and do these live streams much more regularly. So, Lingua Latina. Thank you. I will look that up so I remember it after. So, have a great evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining me. It's a little chilly here, so it's nice to sit in my somewhat warm office with a jacket on and talk to you all. Have I grown yacon? Yes, I have. I haven't had great results from it. We get some roots. I don't really like them very much, but they're cool to look at. Have a great evening, and until next time, may your thumbs always be green. And remember, calories first.